So today is the first lecture of IPC. I want to tell you that we'll only deal with preliminary topics for now. Preliminary meaning that I will just take up some small points like what are the stages of crime, what are the elements of crime, what are the popular definitions of crime, because this sort of question rarely comes, but it does come. Alright. So that is why I want to deal with all of these things. These are very preliminary things, and then I'll deal with some of the definitions. What are the definitions of the following term? What is the difference between knowledge, intention, motive, and your mens rea and strict liability? All of these things we'll be dealing with before we actually start with the substantive provisions of IPC. Now, why do we need to have this preliminary discussion? In order for you to get a working knowledge that okay, this particular word has been used in a particular sense in a particular provision, and in order for you to get to that level, it is very essential that you have a working knowledge or a working definition of those particular terms. Alright. So first of all, what is IPC? IPC is a substantive law. It provides for the offences. It under its numerous sections, it prescribes that if a particular act or omission falls within the four contours of those sections, or it falls within any of the offences prescribed under IPC, then in those situations a person shall be punished for such act or omission in accordance with the sentence prescribed. Alright. Very simple definition. So, when was IPC assented to? It was assented by Governor General on 6th of October 1860. The draft of IPC was first prepared by the First Law Commission. It was chaired by Thomas Babington Macaulay in 1834 and was submitted to Governor General of India Council in 1835. And Lord Macaulay actually derived elements from Napoleonic Code and Edward Livingston's Louisiana Civil Code of 1825, and then clubbed it all together and found some situations very peculiar to India and submitted the draft of the code to Governor General of India. After that, it was assented later, but when it came into force, it is very important. From which date IPC commenced? It commenced from 1st of January 1862. Please note down all of this. It commenced from 1st of January 1862. So it was assented on 6th of October 1860, but it commenced on 6th of October 1862. Now IPC was revised again later by Sir Barnes Peacock, who later became the first Chief Justice of Calcutta High Court. I am just telling you all these points because they might arrive in your preliminary examinations, but apart from that, these are very academic in nature. So we can ignore all of that and just if you have noted down all of these things that I have just told you, nothing else is that important. Always also keep in mind that after revocation of Article 370, IPC has extended to the now Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. Alright. IPC has extended to those states now. Earlier there was Ranbir Penal Code. Now the Ranbir Penal Code is no longer there. Alright. IPC has extended to the state of Jammu Kashmir along with many other central laws which fall under concurrent list. So I will start with the general definition of crimes, that jurisprudential definitions that has been given in relation to crime. The old Roman law says that without law there is no crime. So the legislature, while defining crimes, takes into consideration various factors: social factors, sociological factors, economic factors, political conditions, and other things that it thinks fit. Crime is a public wrong. Public wrong in a sense, it causes injury to the public or community as a whole, and any member of the public can move the court if it causes threat to his social security and creates social disorder. It is a wrong pursued by the sovereign or its subordinate, that is like police officials, judicial officers. For example, in the cases of murder, rape, theft or forgery, you actually go to the court or subordinate of the sovereign, the police officer, that please lodge my FIR because a certain offense has taken place. In those situations, the criminal law machinery comes into motion and your grievance is addressed in a court of law. So these things are very common, and these acts happen because crime is a public wrong. Alright, this is why the sovereign is pursuing your own remedy. Sovereign who is the sovereign? The state is the sovereign, not the monarch. We don't have monarchical system. The state, in jurisprudential sense, it is the state who is considered a sovereign. So let us suppose you file an FIR. Then you will always notice that the name of the case is let's suppose State and City of Delhi versus so and so, accused A. Alright, imagine this. State and City of Delhi versus accused A. These sorts of names are there. Then why State and City of Delhi name is there? Why the name of the state is there when the criminal law has been set in motion by a particular person? Let us suppose you personally have put criminal law in motion. Then in those situations, you need to keep in mind that it is the state which fights your case for you. Of course, you have the remedy under section 200 of the CRPC where you can pursue a private complaint also, but ignore that for now. But generally, it is the duty of the state to redress the public wrong of crime. It is the duty of the state primarily. That is why it is the state which initiates the prosecution. On an FIR, it is the officer of the state who conduct an investigation, who collect the evidence. So you need to keep in mind and you need to understand that it is the state's primary duty, and it is one of the most ancient duties of the state to redress the public wrong of crime. Alright, see, there are many other definitions. The crime is not only considered a public wrong, it is there is a definition of crime as a moral wrong, as a conventional wrong, as a social wrong, as a procedural wrong, as a legal wrong. Alright, so I will be dealing with all those jurisprudential definitions in short. But before that, I'll just tell you how the crime has evolved in new era, in this information and technology era. Now a new branch of crime has emerged, cyber terrorism. Alright, cyber crimes. So what it involves is that it is a crime where a person actually hacks your computer, steals your important data, or actually uses your data in a way that it harms your personal sense of security. You might have seen the instances where, or heard about instances where some friends or some people actually what they do is if a woman is having her Facebook profile and there is her image on her display picture, so what they'll do is copy that image, morph that image and paste it on the face of a pornographic actress. So what it does, it actually destroys the social self-esteem and dignity of that particular woman whose image they have morphed and superimposed on a pornographic actress face. So these things are new. They earlier never existed, and these are the new creations of your cyber crime. And this has arrived due to information and technology era that we live in. So it has given us the benefit and boons of information at our fingertips also, and it has also given the bane and curse of these sorts of crimes as well. So everything comes with its own pros and cons. Now the cybercrime can be of many instances. It can be tampering with your computer source documents. It can be punishment for dishonestly receiving stolen computer resources or communication device, that is punishable under 66B of the IT Act. Under 66C of the Information and Technology Act, there is a punishment for identity theft. If let us suppose you people have an identity, what I do is I create an exact profile as you. I steal all of your details, I steal all of your data, and I go online and pretend to be you. Alright, that is your identity theft, right? I can even use your data to actually change your bank account passwords, actually change your, let us suppose, address proof and many other things. I can literally toy with your life if I indulge into identity theft. So I'll take your identity, and in those situations it will be very hard for you to prove that you are the person, you are the original person who I am pretending to be. Alright, so ordinarily when you have to prove that you are a particular person, you have to show your identity card, right? What if I also have that identity card? Now you are applying online for a particular exam, I am also applying online for a particular exam. I am using your data, I am using your ID. Now there are two IDs by the same name, right? Now there might be confusion that to whom do we give your particular admit card for the preliminary examination, or the examiner might even think, the examining committee might even think that this particular person is toying with us, so let us not give him an admit card at all. So you can understand that by identity theft a lot of damage can be done. I can steal your insurance details, I can claim insurance benefits which you have toiled through your entire life to accumulate, right? You have been submitting premium throughout your entire life, and I am the person who withdraws your insurance policy. Let us suppose you are paying a certain amount in shares every month, or investing in a blue chip fund, whatever that may be. What I do is, after stealing your identity, I withdraw all those shares and sell it. See, in an online world, it will be very difficult for anyone to understand that who is who. If I have your data, then I can actually steal your identity, right? I can pretend to be you online. And technology has evolved to such a degree that it will be very hard for you to prove that your identity has been stolen if I actually indulge in that. So that is made punishable under 66C. Now there is 66D, that is punishment for cheating by personation, by using a computer resource, that has also been made punishable by IT Act. Violation of privacy. Let us suppose you are indulging into a particular work and I hack your computer and see that what are you doing. Let us suppose you have a webcam on your computer, and by hacking into your computer resources, I turn your webcam on through my side, and then I am monitoring whatever you are doing. Now that is the violation of privacy, and it has been specifically addressed under section 66E of the Information Technology Act. Now then there is punishment for cyber terrorism under 66F. Let us suppose I hack a government website and I indulge into a terror attack, or do something, provide a logistical source of information to terrorists and hack the main computer resources of NIA so that they are unable to perform a particular act, or I hack the RBI servers. So in those situations it would be considered cyber terrorism. Alright, so you need to understand that I'm just giving an illustrative definition of all of this. These are not meant to be exhaustive definitions. I'm not dealing with the IT Act right now. I'm just giving you illustrations that these sorts of crimes are there in new era. They are why most of these crimes are committed? Because it is very easy to learn how to commit them. They hardly require any resources. They can be committed in any jurisdiction. So a person in China or a person sitting in USA or Russia can hack and steal your entire data, can indulge into identity theft also, can even hack your resources and monitor what you're doing. In fact, if you ask me, I will give you so many instances where where there are many people who do not know that how to protect themselves against these sorts of violent cyber attacks, and they do not even know that they are being monitored by these hackers who are sitting in somewhere in some other jurisdiction or in some other country. These sort of stuff happens. Viruses are there. They'll give you a setup file. You think that it is a harmless setup file, and what you have actually done, you have actually incorporated a virus in your computer database, and what that virus is doing, it is stealing and sending your data to the hacker, or is stealing your credit card details, several other things. So this is a crime in new era. IPC to a certain extent doesn't deal with that. Information and Technology Act deals with your offenses of cyber terrorism and cyber acts and cyber crimes. IPC is a general law, right? IPC is not at all concerned about your offenses relating to cyber crime to a certain extent. Information Technology Act, yes, it is very much concerned with that. It is a specific provisions. It has specific provision for that. So when we have a specific act dealing with a particular subject, we call it, we use the maxim generalia specialibus non-derogant. A general act does not act in derogation of a special law. So IT Act is a special law, and when there are offenses of cyber crime, we'll deal with them in accordance with IT Act, Information and Technology Act 2000. Generally, we do not incorporate the provision of IPC. So now I'll just give you some small definitions of crime that I was telling you. The crime is a public wrong. That is the first most popular definition. Sir William Blackstone defines crimes in two ways in his work. First, as committed or omitted act to violate public law. Alright, very simple definition. Committed or omitted act to violate a public law. And avoiding or leading it, the violation of public law, it would only be a political offense, and such offenses are only the part of criminal law. So according to Sir William Blackstone, if you commit any act or omission, if you perform a particular act, जैसे कि आपको कुछ करना है, and you refrain from doing from a particular act, which can be termed as omission, then you have violated a public law. If the sovereign has actually given that definition, that do not actually indulge into such act. So this definition of Sir William Blackstone is wide and covers almost a variety of all legal wrongs, but to a certain extent it does not take into its consideration some of the crimes which are left out. Let us suppose the crime of adultery is a moral wrong, right? And it used to be an offense, but it has been now struck down. But let us suppose if adultery was still living, if that law was still living, then in those situations what would have been done? Then the definition of Sir William Blackstone, that a crime is a public wrong, is not at all sufficient, because at the second stage of his definition, Sir Blackstone actually modified his definition and said a crime is a violation of public right and duties due to whole community considered as a community. By that, Sir William Blackstone means that crime is a violation of public right and duties. See, this portion is very easy to understand, that if you have particular rights, then you also have particular duties, right? And then you live with a particular community. Let us suppose, what is your community? Your community is the people of India, right? Your community are the people of India. So if you violate the rights of others, then in those situations you could have been said to have committed a crime. But then again, this definition is not at all sufficient, but it is very important for you to know that Sir William Blackstone actually gave this definition, because often a question might come that who gave this definition, and it will only come in preliminary examination. It will not come in your mains examination. Then Sergeant Stephen, while editing Blackstone's commentary, modified the definition to some extent and said that his definition is: a crime is a violation of a right considered in reference to the evil tendency of such violation as regards to the community at large. So what Sergeant Stephen did while editing the definition of Sir William Blackstone was that he simply said, and I agree with him, that crime is a violation of right considered in reference to an evil tendency. Let us suppose, and the keywords here are violation of a right, evil tendency, and community at large. These are the keywords. So when you commit a particular crime, you have actually violated the rights of the communities, because it is the right of the community to live in a peaceful environment. Let us suppose a person has committed dacoity. Now this will have a ripple effect in the society. It will create a sense of unease, a sense of panic that they might be next victim of dacoity, right? So this is an evil tendency, and you have also violated the right of the community at large to live at peace. Every community, no matter in which part of the world, always desires that the crime shall not be committed against them. So this is why when a crime is committed and the crime has an evil tendency, then it can be rightly be said that a crime is a violation of a right considered in reference to the evil tendency of such violation as regards the community at large. This definition was given by Sergeant Stephen while editing Blackstone's commentary. So it is very easy to understand. Take yourself for example. What is your primary concern while dealing with a crime? All of you want that a crime should not be committed against you. Let us suppose if in your locality a particular heinous crime is committed, it will affect your sense of social security. And if it does affect your sense of social security, it could be said that the evil tendency, that the evil act that the accused person committed in your locality has affected your right as a community to have a sense of social security, right? So this is why Sergeant Stephen gave this definition. The next definition that we come to is that crime is a moral wrong. So when we deal with the definition that a crime is a moral wrong, so we need to understand that the word crime, focus on the first part of crime, C-R-I. It has come from the Greek statement krimos. Again, the word kri, it is very important because it has roots in Sanskrit. And why kri and krimos are related to Sanskrit? Because they find their origin in the word karma. Alright. So the word crime, if applied to those acts against the social order and earnest of serious guilty verdict, is preferred by the society. That if a particular person, let us suppose, commits a particular crime, and those acts are such which affects the social order, and his karma or krimos or crime is of such a degree that it has a tendency to affect the social order and the moral order, then in those situations it could be said that he is seriously guilty of a crime, and a guilty verdict should be pronounced upon him. So the word crime also has its origin in the Latin word to accuse. Alright. And it has origin in a Sanskrit word also, kri, to do. Alright. That is why I told you to focus on the starting word of the crime. So it has origin in actually 3 languages: Sanskrit, Greek and Latin. In Greek word krimos, Sanskrit word karma, and your Latin word which means actually to accuse. So dealing further with the crime as a moral wrongs definition, Rafael Garofalo defines, and it is a very well-known criminologist and penologist. Rafael Garofalo defines crime in a sociological perspective in the following words: An immoral and harmful act is a crime that is viewed as criminal by public opinion because it is an injury to the moral sense as is possessed by a community, a measure which is indispensable for the adaptation of the individual society. So you might encounter a question that who said the following words, again in the preliminary examination. So you need to know that it is Rafael Garofalo who said that. You might also encounter a question like that who propounded, who is among the following option, who gave a definition regarding crime as a moral wrong. So these sort of questions may come, and it is rare, but they do come. Often one or two questions at best. Then I come to the third definition, that is conventional wrong, crime as a conventional wrong. Then Edwin Sutherland, a noted criminologist, defines crime in terms of criminal behavior. He says, criminal behavior is an act in violation of criminal law. It is not the degree of immorality, reprehensibility, or indecency of an act. It is not a crime unless it is prohibited by the criminal law. The criminal law is defined conventionally as a body of specific rules regarding human conduct, which has promulgated by the political authority, which apply by all members of the class to which the rules referred, and which are enforced by the punishment which is administered by the state. Characteristics which distinguish the body of rules regarding human conduct from other rules: politically specificity, uniformity, and penal sanction. So Edwin Sutherland actually just focused on the realist aspect of the crime. He simply said that I don't buy this argument that crime is a moral wrong or a public wrong. It is the criminal law is defined as a body of specific rules which deals with your human conduct. It says that a sovereign the sovereign or a political authority may actually prohibit certain acts to be committed, or certain omissions to be committed by a certain person, that you cannot indulge into a particular omission or you cannot commit a particular act that can be prescribed by your sovereign. And this prescription is only there for a regulation of human conduct, alright, which apply to all the members and all the classes of the society. So what he is focusing on, what Edwin Sutherland is focusing on, is the human aspect, that the human conduct, that these body of rules of criminal law only deal with regulation of human conduct. That is it. So this is the heading of conventional wrong. Then we come to fourth definition, that the crime as a social wrong. Now this is one of the more popular definitions. The definition, form, and concept of crime can change with time and regimes and the attitudinal scope of the society. Some crime become obsolete and some crime assume a new and broader scope. Therefore, the definitions of crime depend on the situation and times. So John Gallian gave a definition of crime, and he subscribed to the theory that the crime is a social wrong. That crime is an act which is harmful to the society, or that is to be socially harmful by a group of people which has the power to enforce its belief, and that places such act under the ban of positive penalties. I'll reiterate the definition of John Gallian. Crime is an act which is harmful to the society, or that is to be socially harmful. That is considered to be socially harmful by a group of people who have the power to enforce their own beliefs, and that place and at that place such act can be banned in guise of positive penalties. I am just rephrasing his definition because it is very short and the syntax is not at all correct for people to understand. So that is why I rephrase some of the terms. That is the sort of problem that you always encounter while dealing with these sorts of definitions, because what the author is trying to do, let us suppose John Gillian, Raphael Garofalo, Sir William Blackstone, all of these people, what they are trying to do is reduce the scope of the argument. They are trying to reduce it to the simplest of terms. So that is why what happens is often the definition does not make sense, and a person has to read their entire work, which spans into volumes, in order to properly understand what they are saying. So that is why sometimes a 3 or 4 line definition doesn't do justice to the author. That is why sometimes rephrasing is required, that I've done right now. In Soviet Russia, again they also subscribe to this theory that the crime is social wrong. Crime has been defined in terms of socially dangerous acts. Commission or omission of a socially dangerous act has been provided by the criminal law if you violate the state system or the Soviet social or socialist property, the social economic system, and the other rights of citizen, or any other, or you commit any other socially dangerous act which are prohibited by the criminal law, then you violate the socialist legal order and it shall be considered to be a crime. Again, continuing from the crime as a theory of social wrong, Roscoe Pond was again an American jurist. He was a different person and he is very popular. He said that he submitted his theory of social interest, which closely relates to crime. He referred to it as oppression. He considered crime as a form of oppression. His theory postulates that legal awareness of living beings is nothing but social awareness. His jurisprudence is social engineering. He highlights on the interest of life, liberty, religion, security, and general progress and social institutions with infringement and dominance, and where infringement and dominance of any other person's right can be considered to be a crime. So he actually cast a very wide net when it came to the definition of crime in the socialist realm as well. He just considered it as a form of oppression and just said that if you violate any person's right, it could be said, and you dominate any other person, you violate his sense of life, liberty, religion, security, and his general progress, then you could have been said that you have committed a crime. Alright, such an argument can be made against you. That was a view of Roscoe Pond, primarily. Now the next view is crime as a procedural wrong. The proponent of this theory is John Austin. He defines crime in the nature of proceeding. He says, a wrong which is pursued by a sovereign or a subordinate is a crime. A wrong which is pursued at the discretion of the injured party and his representative is a civil wrong. So Austin is saying that if the state were to pursue a crime, then it is a public wrong, and if a wrong is being pursued by an injured party in his private capacity, then it is merely a civil wrong, a private wrong. So his definition is not at all considered good. Later, on the definition of Austin, Professor Kenny has modified his definition and prefers his own definition and says, crimes are wrong whose sanction is punitive. By punitive, it means that it actually punishes you. You know, the sentence is there of life imprisonment or any sort of imprisonment, and the fine, when the provision for fine is there. So Professor Kenny says crimes are wrong whose sanction is punitive and is in no way remissible by any private person. So a private person cannot give a remission if you commit a crime. It is only the state which can give the remission. Continuing further, Kenny says it is remissible by the crown alone, if remissible at all. Again, Professor Kenny's definition is also not is also incomplete. Why? Because you know that under CRPC there is a provision for compounding of offences, right? Such provisions are there. So in those situations, Professor Kenny's definition doesn't hold good. And again, the definition of crime has not been defined satisfactorily. And Russell, in respect of this, says criminal offences are basically the creation of criminal policy adopted from time to time by those sections of the community who are powerful or astute enough to safeguard their own security and comfort by causing the sovereign power in the state to repress the conduct which they feel may endanger their position. So I think the Russell's definition is very practical. He says that it is basically the criminal policy which are evolved by the powerful sections of the community, which in our case will be the state, and in order to safeguard the community interest and safeguard their own private interest, they actually prohibit certain act or certain conduct which they feel may endanger their position. This is also true to a certain extent, but again, this is not that complete. This definition also falls within the description of a crime as a procedural wrong. Now the next definition that we come to is a crime as a legal wrong. So what it does, this theory does, it classifies that in every instance of crime there are three characteristics. Always three characteristics or three elements are always present. One, the sovereign power in the state desires to prevent that which is harmful due to human conduct. Second, the measures of prevention are selected for the threat of punishment. Like if let us suppose state prohibits certain act. Let us suppose he has prohibited your murder. Then in those situations, there is a penal sanction there. The legislature has not simply said that do not commit murder. It has actually given you a punishment that if you do commit a particular crime, then you will be punished in accordance with this sentence. And the sentence is of life imprisonment or death. And third element that is there, the legal proceedings are of a special kind and are employed to decide whether the person accused did in fact cause the harm and is according to law to be held guilty, to be held punishable for committing such an act. Right? So for that we have your trial courts. Trial courts determined according to the procedure laid down under CRPC that whether such person is guilty or not. In the case of, in the illustration of murder, we know that a sessions trial shall be performed in order to find out whether such person is guilty of murder or not. Or let us suppose he was just acting in his right of private defense, he is not actually guilty of murder. That would come after the conclusion will come after the evidence is taken in the sessions trial, right? So crime as a legal wrong is also a good theory, but again it is not totally complete, because often moral characteristics are also taken into account, which this legal wrong definition doesn't take into its account at all. So Tapan, in discussing crime as a legal wrong, puts forward a definition and says, an intentional act or omission in violation of a criminal law committed without any defense or justification and penalized by law as felony or misdemeanor. So what he did here was, he simply said, in essence, he simply means this: if you violate a particular provision of an act, you have committed a crime. That is very easy, and that is also very simple and a real definition, right? In reality, if you look at the definition of Tapan, you will come to a conclusion that definition is very real. You cannot, if you, let us suppose you have not committed a crime laid down under IPC or any other statute, can you still be punished for a crime if it doesn't find its place under the statute book? The answer is no. You cannot be punished for such an act. Can you be punished for eating let us suppose you ate a particular kind of Shahi Paneer on a particular day, and there is no law of government. This is a very absurd example, but it is necessary for you to imagine the situation. Let us suppose Parliament is not prescribed a particular procedure that you cannot eat a particular sort of food on a particular day, and if you do, then you will be punishable as such. Parliament has not prescribed anything like that. So, if the Parliament has not prescribed something like that, or the state government has not prohibited it under its own legislative power, then in those situations, can it be said that you have committed a crime? The answer is no. In here, we also encounter an issue of beef eating. Alright, there are several states which prohibit beef consumption, and specifically speaking, I am talking about cow's meat. In some states it is punishable by up to 7 years, some states it is punishable by up to 3 years, and stuff like that is there. So actually slaughtering a cow is punishable. You need to be very clear about that. In some of the northeastern states, cow slaughter is allowable, and in Kerala also cow meat is not made punishable by the state legislature, but in Delhi, UP and certain other parts of India, it is a punishable act. So let us suppose in Kerala a person is eating cow meat, right? He is eating beef. So can he be said to have committed a crime if the state government hasn't prohibited it? The answer is no, not in that state. If you perform the same act in UP, you will be punishable. If you perform the same act in Delhi, you will be punishable. But if you perform the same act in a domain where the law has not prescribed it to be a penal offense, then in those situations, you will not be punished. You need to be very clear about this principle. The principle is very simple. For an offense, for an existence of an offense, it needs to have a definition. It needs to be prescribed. And if the offense doesn't exist in the statute book or under any other law, then in those situations you are not committing an offense. Alright. So let us suppose cow slaughter has been prohibited in UP, but it has not been prohibited in Kerala. If you perform the same act in Kerala, you will not be punished. But if you perform the same act in UP, you will be punished. So you need to be very clear that if a specific act is prohibited in a particular jurisdiction, then notwithstanding that in other jurisdiction it has not been prohibited, you will still be punished if you commit that act within that particular jurisdiction. Right? But if the particular act is not at all prescribed, then you will not be punished, even though the act is made punishable in other jurisdiction. So imagine something like this. On one fine day, A is an accused. Mr. A wanted to eat beef and cow meat. See, beef is a very loose term. Mostly people use it for buffalo meat and your cow's meat as well. But buffalo meat has not been prohibited by law. Cow's meat has been prohibited by law in certain states. So we can argue that let us suppose on one fine day this gentleman wanted to eat beef and cow's meat, specifically cow's meat, not buffalo's meat. He wanted to eat beef in Uttar Pradesh or Delhi, and this gentleman is from Kerala. He thinks that the particular act is not punishable there. I am a Keralite. I live in Kerala, and I usually eat beef in Kerala. So why not I do it in Delhi? And he actually goes there, illegally gets himself beef, and then he is later arrested. So in those situations, this person will be punished in Delhi, notwithstanding that in his own state the act is not at all punishable. While if let us suppose a gentleman living in Delhi goes to Kerala and he finds that there are people who have indulged in cow slaughter, and he goes to a police station and complains that a particular act is prohibited in my state, then how can Kerala allow it? Then in those situations, since the offence has not been prescribed as an offence in Kerala, the FIR cannot be lodged because there is no offence, right? Beef eating is not an offence in Kerala. Cow slaughter is not an offence in Kerala. So in those situations, you cannot say that merely because act is punishable in one jurisdiction, the act should be punishable in other jurisdiction also. So you need to be very clear regarding these parameters, where an act has been made punishable under one jurisdiction and act has not been made punishable into other jurisdictions. Then you have to be very clear about both of these things, where it has been made punishable and where it has been not. If it has not been made punishable, then you cannot be prosecuted for an act which is not an offence. It is very simple. You cannot be prosecuted for an act which is not an offence in your jurisdiction. Drinking liquor or consuming liquor or selling liquor is prohibited in Bihar, and there is a jail term for that, very severe one at that, but it is not prohibited in UP. If you, let us suppose, if you decide that you want to drink some sort of liquor and you are in Bihar and you illegally get yourself some liquor bottles and later you are arrested, you cannot take a plea that you do not belong to the state of Kerala, you do not belong to the state of Bihar, and you actually belong to UP or Delhi, and in your jurisdiction it is allowed that you can consume liquor, but in Bihar it has been prohibited. Because you committed a particular crime within the state of Bihar, and the legislative competence of Bihar runs throughout its territorial jurisdiction, and if Bihar is prohibited that a particular liquor will not be consumed within its own territorial boundaries, and you have violated that law under the Excise Act, then in those situations you will be punished, notwithstanding your place. Similarly, if a person from Bihar drinks liquor in Delhi, he cannot be punished for that. Alright, so you need to be very clear. Has the crime been prescribed? Has the crime been prescribed? If at all it has been prescribed, does it apply under the jurisdiction in which I am sitting or under which I am residing? That is the second question. So when you get the answer to those, you come to a conclusion that yes, the particular crime has been made punishable. This is what the legal wrong theory proceeds upon. It is quite practical. It is a quite good definition, but again it is incomplete. Alright, in certain aspect. I don't want to go into the jurisprudential aspect of it, because from the point of view of the exams and even from the practical point of view, it is not essential. It is only essential for the academics. So next I come to the Lord and Majesty of Evidence Act, Sir James Fitzjames Stephen. He says crime is an act forbidden by law and revolting to the moral sentiments of the society. The definition of Sir James Fitzjames Stephen is short, precise and very accurate. He says that crime is a forbidden act. Forbidden by whom? Forbidden by the state. And it revolts to the moral sentiments of the society. To a certain extent, Sir James is right. He is saying, but his definition does fall under the definition of crime as a legal wrong, because he actually talks about the act forbidden by law. He is not going into the argument that merely because an act violates the moral sentiments, then he should be punished. Alright, you can understand it like this. In a moral argument, it can be said that, let us suppose, some communities considered love marriage as something opposed to morality. That's why you have honor killings. And it is their sense of morality is very subjective. Everybody's sense of morality is very subjective. That is why moral theory cannot be held to have a good ground. It cannot be said to be complete, because everybody has a different sort of morals. And it is a very subjective concept, not an objective concept. So Sir James is saying that the crime should be forbidden by law. So it should be forbidden by law. That is why he falls under the crime as a legal wrong school. He falls under that definition. And then he says the acts which are forbidden revolts to the moral sentiments of the society. Moral sentiments. The argument is totally right. Why? Because you can argue that, let us suppose a person commits murder, a heinous murder. Anybody could say that that is opposed to your morals. If a person commits rape, you can say that it is opposed to morality. If a person commits robbery, dacoity, theft, you can say it's opposed to morality. If a person house trespass at night, you can say it's opposed to morality. You are not supposed to go uninvited. If a person, let us say, says that criminal intimidation is bad, then it has not only been prohibited by law, it is also opposed to the moral sentiments of the society. But take this argument and now argue like the moralistic schools and say adultery is bad. Why? Because it is opposed to your morals. True, it is opposed to the morality, but if it has not been prohibited by criminal law, then it is not an offense. The morality school will argue that it is an offense because it is opposed to morality. So generally, there has been academic conflict with these schools because they have put themselves into a watertight compartments. And I don't think compartmentalization is a way for development of law. I think more open mind. Everybody is right to a certain extent. So what there should actually be a confluence of thoughts among all of these schools, rather than compartmentalizing all of them and saying that I subscribe to this school or I subscribe to that school, or that school is wrong and that school is not correct. This is purely my subjective opinion, because practically the law is not concerned with all of these things, that whether it's a legal wrong or it's a moral wrong or it is a procedural wrong. Law doesn't care. The law simply sees this: act has been prohibited, you committed that act, it falls within the 4 parameters and elements, then the act is prohibited and you will be punished as such. Practically this is the scenario. That is why I do not like dealing with the theoretical aspects. This is the first time you are looking at me dealing with a theoretical aspect, because anybody who has heard my CRPC lecture will testify that I do not deal with theoretical aspects at all, because not only they do not help you in the long run, they actually are only good from the point of view of the academics, not from the point of view of the exam as well, because you are not going to write everything like this everywhere. So just listen to it, just read it for once and understand that who said what. Alright, you do not need to be an expert on all of these things. You need to be aware about these definitions as to who falls under what definition, who said what. That's it. Now I come to another thing, that there is victimless crime. Some crimes are victimless, that a particular act has been committed with a guilty intention, yet there is no victim of a crime. Example for that is a person drinking. A person is a drunkard, he is publicly drinking, and public begging, or let us suppose a person is a drug addict. Here you do not have a second person as the victim, you have the person itself as the victim. The person who commits the crime, he himself is the victim. Such crimes are called victimless crime, because victim is always imagined as a person who is someone other than the offender, right? So victim is always imagined as a person who is someone other than the offender. Offender is the person who commits the crime. So that is why these crimes are called victimless crimes. Often, let us suppose homosexuality was prohibited. 5 years ago it was prohibited. So imagine this situation: if 2 consenting adults indulge into a homosexual behavior and perform their sexual deeds, then can it be said to be a crime? And can it be said that there is a victim? Of course, if you look at the legal definition, you will say yes, of course it's a crime, but you cannot say that there is a victim, because both of the persons who indulged into this behavior actually consented to that and actually wanted that behavior to be performed, right? But since the law has prohibited that under section 377 of the IPC, hence that cannot be a defense that merely because you consented to such a homosexual behavior then you will be let off. 5 years ago this was the situation, but now after Navtej Singh Johar versus Union of India, the situation has been reversed. 377 has not been struck down. 377 has only been read down. By reading down, Supreme Court actually means that if two consenting adults perform your sexual intercourse two homosexual adults perform your sexual intercourse, then in those situations, if they are consenting adults, then in those situations section 377 does not apply on them. But if a person actually rapes a let us suppose a homosexual person rapes another man by drugging him, then that would be an offense under 377. 377 is very much alive, but it has been read down, while your adultery has actually been struck down. Adultery was struck down in Joseph Sain versus Union of India. You need to be very aware about these constitutional provisions. Of course, I'll be dealing with them, but I'm just giving you a gist of what is about to come. So basically, I was talking about a victimless crime, right? So, see, the offenses of drug trafficking and drug addicts, alcohol addicts, these can be said to be victimless crimes, where there is not a third person as a victim or a second person as a victim. Here, you could argue the victim is that person himself who has become an addict. So you can always say that. But of course, what the argument that I am making, that here the victim is the person who himself commits those acts, is my subjective view. Generally, you will always call that offenses of where a person is a drug addict or the person is an alcohol addict. These sorts of persons are these sorts of offenses can be classified as a victimless crime, because victim is always imagined as your second person who is someone other than the offender. So now I come to the fundamental elements of crime. Alright, I think there are two more theoretical parts, then I'll start with your definitions. We'll start with the practical aspects. Then after this, the entire IPC will start in a practical scenario. What are the fundamental elements of crime? See, focus on my words. Elements of crime, not stages of crime. These two things are different. Often what happens is that students confuse the two because the terminology is very same. In those situations, what they do is they commit an error in the exam. So fundamental elements of crime are four. Human being first. The first is human being. Second is mens rea or guilty intention. Third is actus reus or illegal act or omission. And fourth is injury. These are the fundamental elements of a crime. Human being, mens rea, actus reus and injury. So the first element being human being, it means that you can very easily understand that IPC applies on humans. It doesn't apply on an animal. Yes, in ancient times, if you let me tell you, in ancient times, animals were also tried by your British courts. In 12th, 13th and 14th till 15th century, you have cases where you have animals being tried for offences as if they were men, right? So criminal law did apply on them, but after the society became more civilized in those scenarios, then they realized that the mental capacity of animals is not the same as that of a man. So the criminal law should only be confined to human beings. So present law that we have is crime can only be committed by a human being who must be under a legal obligation to act in a particular manner and should be a fit subject for awarding appropriate punishment. Now why do I say that he must be under a legal obligation to act in a particular manner? So let us suppose there are certain crimes which require omission. Then if omission is a substance of that, or if it is a mandate of law that such person should actually perform such certain acts, then there should be a legal obligation. It is a legal obligation of a police officer to actually investigate a crime. If he doesn't, or if he illegally botches the investigation or violates the procedural law, or refuses to, let us suppose he refuses to register an FIR relating to crime against women, alright, then in those situations he can be prosecuted under section 166A of the IPC. But here the police officer has a legal obligation. If let us suppose you come to me as a lawyer and you say that a particular crime has been committed against me and you are a woman, and if let us suppose I refuse your case, that I say I will not appear in your case, then you cannot say that I should be prosecuted under 166A because I do not have a legal obligation. Alright, the legal obligation should be present. Then second thing that is essential, that he should be a fit subject for awarding appropriate punishment. Let us suppose the person who has committed an offence is of an unsound mind, or he is dully incapax, he is below 7 years of age. He cannot be given appropriate punishment. Again, so the requirement is not only that he is a human being, that he should also be a fit subject for awarding appropriate punishment, right? So these are the few illustrative things that I wanted to explain to you. That just don't think that is a human being, then that is enough. Then you have these sorts of defenses that the human being is a child under 7 years of age, and let us suppose the human who is adult is of unsound mind, right? Then there are certain other privileges. The President of India cannot be prosecuted for a crime while he is holding the office of a president, right? These sorts of immunities are there. Now, section 11 of Indian Penal Code. See, I am not just starting with the IPC yet. IPC is not started yet, but I am just saying that the person word includes company, association, or a body of person, whether incorporated or not. I have always told you, whenever the statute uses the term includes, it means that more than this is within its ambit. The statute is only illustrating that these also come within its ambit. So section 11 is actually saying that company is also a person for the purpose of IPC. It will become relevant very later when I will be dealing with your sections of cheating and your defamation. But know this, that person includes a company or association or body of person, and includes artificial juridical persons. It also, and of course it also includes me and you as well, right? That is why the legislature in its wisdom has used the term including. Whenever you see a word in a statute and it starts with it includes, it means the definition that has been given by the legislature is not intended to be exhaustive. It is only meant to be illustrative. Alright, legislature आपको सिर्फ एक एग्जाम्पल देना चाहता है, वो पूरी तरीके से डेफिनेशन को खत्म नहीं करना चाहता कि इसके बियॉन्ड कुछ नहीं है. वो हमेशा ये कहना चाहता है, जब भी इंक्लूसिव शब्द का यूज करता है वो कहता है कि इसके बियॉन्ड बहुत कुछ है, बट हम आपको बस एक एग्जाम्पल दे रहे हैं कि ये चीजें इसमें आता है. You will always construe inclusive definition by the statutory rule of interpretation of ageisdem generis. इसका मतलब है कि आप उसको वैसे इंटरप्रेट करेंगे जैसे कि बाकी के जो इलस्ट्रेशन दिए हैं उसकी जेनेसिस और स्पीशीज से जो मिलता जुलता है. आप उसमें वो सारी चीज़ें ना इंक्लूड कर लें तो उससे मिलता जुलता है नहीं. अब मान लीजिए पर्सन आपने पढ़ा और इंक्लूसिव डेफिनेशन सोच ली तो और आपने सोचा कि इसमें तो एनिमल्स भी आ जाएंगे, तो एनिमल्स नहीं आएंगे, तभी उसमें आर्टिफिशियल पर्सन्स की बात की है. यू विल यूज द इंक्लूसिव डेफिनेशन एंड कंस्ट्रू इट विद द रूल ऑफ एजेस्डम जनरस. ठीक है. नेक्स्ट इज मेंस रिया. तो ह्यूमन बीइंग पार्ट आपको समझ में आ गया होगा. मेंस रिया. अब मेंस रिया क्या होता है? इसकी पूरी मैक्सिम है एक्टस नॉन फैसेट निसी. एक सेकेंड, इसकी पूरी मैक्सिम है एक्टस नॉन फैसेट्रियम निसी मेंसिट्स रिया. ऑलराइट, इट मीन्स that a person cannot be an act cannot be illegal in nature unless it is done with a guilty intention, right? In essence it means that only. So mens rea is second most essential element of a crime or an evil intent or guilty mind. So there can be no crime without an intention generally, unless there is a rule of strict liability. वो मैं आऊँगा बाद में, लेकिन generally हर लॉ में ये प्रिज्यूम किया जाता है कि देयर इज एन इंटेंशन. और ध्यान रखिए, अनलाइक द ब्रिटिश कोर्ट्स, आप कभी भी स्टैट्यूट में ये नहीं प्रिज्यूम करेंगे. यू विल नॉट प्रिज्यूम दैट इफ द स्टैट्यूट इज नॉट एट ऑल प्रिस्क्राइबिंग द सर्टेन वर्ड्स, लेट अस सपोज वर्ड्स लाइक वॉलंटरली, नॉलेज, इंटेंशन और नेग्लिजेंस एसेट्रा, ये वर्ड्स नहीं प्रिस्क्राइब किए, मैलिग्नेंटली, फ्रॉडुलेंटली, डिसऑनेस्टली, ये नहीं बताया है, तो आप रीड इन नहीं करेंगे. वो इंडिया में योर लेजिस्लेचर इट सेल्फ टेल्स यू कि क्या गिल्टी इंटेंशन है, और वो स्टैट्यूट की बुक में ही बता देगा. सो दैट इज वाई व्हेन वी रीड, लेट अस सपोज वी रीड योर सेक्शन ऑफ थेफ्ट. द थेफ्ट कैसे डिफाइंड है? डिसऑनेस्टली मूविंग अ प्रॉपर्टी. तो वहां पे लेजिस्लेचर ने बता दिया कि इंटेंशन आपको क्या देखना है, डिसऑनेस्ट इंटेंशन देखना है, राइट? दैट इज व्हाट यू हैव टू सी. तो ये एक इलस्ट्रेशन मैं आपको दे रहा हूँ, बाद में मैं आपको डिटेल में प्रिस्क्राइब करूंगा. मैंने स्टार्ट विद आईपीसी की क्या क्या होता है इसमें. एक दो दिन की और बात है आई थिंक, क्योंकि अभी आपको स्ट्रिक्ट लाइबिलिटी भी समझाना होगा कि स्ट्रिक्ट लाइबिलिटी क्या होती है और कैसे अलग होती है. पर ध्यान रखिएगा, जब आप स्टैट्यूट पढ़ते हैं आईपीसी की, तो जो भी टर्म्स यूज किए लेजिस्लेचर ने, जैसे डिसऑनेस्टली, वॉलंटरली, इंटेंशन, आपका नॉलेज एसेट्रा, ये जितने भी वर्ड्स हैं, मैलिग्नेंटली, फ्रॉडुलेंटली एसेट्रा, ये जितने भी वर्ड्स हैं, ये आपको स्टैट्यूट में ही मिलेंगे. आप स्टैट्यूट के बाहर से वो वर्ड नहीं ला सकते, ठीक है? दिस शुड बी वेरी क्लियर. अंडर इंडियन लॉ इट इज नॉट अलाउड. अंडर इंडियन लॉ द स्टैट्यूट इटसेल्फ इज प्रिस्क्राइब दैट व्हाट आर द रिक्वायरमेंट्स ऑफ मेंस rea. All right. So generally the requirement of mens rea is always there. So you know the maxim. It is a well-known maxim. Actus non facitorium nisi mens sit rea, which means a guilty intention and a guilty act together constitute a crime. A crime cannot be, a person cannot be held guilty of a crime without a guilty mind, etc. in a sense. Then we come to the next stage of crime, actus reus. That is the third essential element of crime. So actus reus is actually an act or omission which results in completion of a crime. So in a murder case, what is the actus reus? When an accused person actually kills a man, actually commits a homicide, then the act has been performed. Let us suppose an accused person stabs the victim in the neck. Due to that he dies. And he does it with an intention that it falls under section 300 of the IPC, the intention. So actus reus is complete the moment the man, the accused person has stabbed the victim, and the stab wound which resulted in his death will cause the actus reus to be complete. So the actus reus is, in short, a guilty act or omission. Let us suppose you are a jailer. It is your duty to supply to prisoners with requisite amount of food in accordance with your government's directives or the statutory law. You have a particular axe to grind against a particular prisoner. So what you do is you omit to supply him food, and you just prohibit any person from giving him food, and you make sure that that person dies a death due to starvation. Then in that case, you as a jailer would be guilty of murder. Here you have not performed a particular act. Here you have omitted to perform a particular act. As your duty as a jailer was to give that prisoner a particular amount of food in accordance with the statutory or government guidelines, and you violated that norm by omitting to perform your duty. And in these situations you will be guilty of murder by omission, right? Because the death can be directly traced to you by your act of omission. Now we come to the fourth element of crime, that is injury. So injury has been defined under section 44 of the IPC. It relates to body, mind, reputation and property. It is a very wide thing. So a crime will always result in an injury, either in body, either in mind, either in reputation or in property. Theft affects injury to property. Murder, rape, hurt, grievous hurt is an injury to the body and mind also. Your defamation is injury to your reputation, stuff like that. You can always find that injury is a very wide term, and it will take within its encompass almost all of the offences that are prescribed in this statute, IPC and any other statute. So injury is a very wide term, and injury is an essential requirement for the fundamental elements of the crime. So what are the four fundamental elements of crime? Human being, mens rea, actus reus and injury. That's it. Nothing extra. Human being, mens rea, actus reus and injury. These are elements of crime. Be very particular of that, because when we come to the stages of crime, the situations will turn itself. The stages of crime is like this: intention, preparation, attempt and actus reus. Right? So first thing is intention. Now you know that intention is mens rea. Let us suppose an accused person desires to commit murder. He has a desire. Let us suppose A wants to commit a murder of B. Then first thing that will crop in his mind, that will pop in his mind is, I want to actually cause death of B in a particular manner. So his intention forms within his mind. अभी उसके दिमाग में फॉर्म करता है इंटेंशन, अभी ये मैनिफेस्ट नहीं हुआ है. So the intention has formed. This is the first stage. कोई भी क्राइम करने से पहले इंटेंशन सबसे पहले फॉर्म होता है. इंटेंशन का मतलब यही नहीं होता कि एक्चुअल इंटेंट, जैसे मैंने बताया, इंटेंशन इज यूज्ड इन अ वेरी वाइड टर्म. ये मेंस रिया का टर्म है, इसमें आपका नॉलेज वाले सब कुछ आ जाता है. सो इंटेंशन इज द फर्स्ट स्टेज. तो फर्स्ट जो एक ऑफेंडर है वो सबसे पहले क्या बनाएगा अपने दिमाग में? इंटेंशन. ही वॉन्ट्स टू कमिट अ मर्डर ऑफ बी. वो बी को मारना चाहता है, तो उसके दिमाग में सबसे पहले आएगा इंटेंशन कि मैं उसको मार दूंगा, और मैं उसको कैसे मारूंगा ये मैं डिसाइड करूंगा. मैं उसको गोली से मारूंगा या मैं उसको चाकू भोंक के मारूंगा, डिपेंडिंग ऑन द सिचुएशन. सेकेंड इज, अब वो अपने इंटेंशन को मैनिफेस्ट करता है रियल वर्ल्ड में. उसको मैनिफेस्ट करता है. मैनिफेस्टेशन कैसे? प्रिपरेशन. गोली से मारने का उसने सोचा, तो कहता है कि मैं जरा कुछ आर्म्स लेके आता हूँ. तो आर्म्स एक्ट में अप्लाई करता है, एक लाइसेंस रिवॉल्वर के लिए रिजेक्ट हो जाता है. फिर दूसरी जगह जाता है, इलीगल मार्केट में, ब्लैक मार्केट से किसी तरीके से एक रिवॉल्वर प्रोक्योर करके लाता है. फिर वहाँ पे बुलेट्स प्रोक्योर करता है. अब ये जो है प्रिपरेशन है. ऑलराइट, हियर हिज एक्ट हैज बीन मैनिफेस्टेड इन द रियल वर्ल्ड. तो जनरली मर्डर के केस की अगर हम बात करें, एक इलस्ट्रेशन लें, तो प्रिपरेशन को जनरली पनिशेबल नहीं किया जाता. लॉ मौका देता है कि अभी पीछे हट जाइए, आपने प्रिपेयर कर लिया है, आपने अपना इंटेंशन मैनिफेस्ट कर दिया है रियल वर्ल्ड में, बट इट इज स्टिल टाइम बैक अवे फ्रॉम दिस रिप्रेंसिबल एक्ट. द एक्ट इज वेरी रिप्रेंसिबल, बैक अवे फ्रॉम इट. बट कुछ ग्रेव ऑफेंस ऐसे हैं जो इतने ग्रेव हैं कि उनका प्रिपरेशन भी पनिशेबल होता है. जैसे प्रिपरेशन टू वेज वॉर अगेंस्ट द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया, वो सेक्शन 122 ऑफ द आईपीसी में पनिशेबल है. प्रिपरेशन टू कमिट डिप्रेटेशन ऑन टेरिटरीज ऑफ पावर एट पीस विद द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया, वो सेक्शन 126 आईपीसी में पनिशेबल है. प्रिपरेशन टू कमिट डकैती, सेक्शन 399 आईपीसी में पनिशेबल है. प्रिपरेशन फॉर काउंटरफिटिंग कॉइन्स और गवर्नमेंट स्टैम्प्स, सेक्शन 233 से 235, 255 और 257 उसमें पनिशेबल है. तो आईपीसी में कई ऐसे, मैंने इलस्ट्रेशन के लिए सेक्शंस आपको बताए. आईपीसी में कई सेक्शंस ऐसे हैं जो आपको प्रिपरेशन की स्टेज पे ही गिल्टी करार दे सकते हैं. सो यू नीड टू बी वेरी क्लियर, बट जनरली ये नहीं होता अनलेस आईपीसी हैज स्पेशली मैंडेटेड कि प्रिपरेशन पनिशेबल है, टिल देन प्रिपरेशन इज नॉट पनिशेबल. अभी जो मैंने आपको लिस्टेशन दी उसमें प्रिपरेशन पनिशेबल है. सो प्राइमरली प्रिपरेशन इज नॉट पनिशेबल अनलेस IPC has made a special provision regarding that. तो क्यों प्रिपरेशन को जनरली पनिशेबल नहीं रखा जाता? अब मर्डर के केस में मर्डर का प्रिपरेशन पनिशेबल कहीं नहीं है. वो इसलिए नहीं है क्योंकि लॉ एक मौका देता है पीछे हटे आइए. डकैती का इसलिए क्योंकि वो इतनी ग्रेव एक्ट है, इतनी खतरनाक एक्ट है कि इसका प्रिपरेशन ही रोक देना चाहिए. वेजिंग वॉर अगेंस्ट द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया इज सच अ ग्रेव एंड डेंजरस एक्ट विच violates the social security of the country at large. So that is why its preparation itself has been made punishable, because the offense is such an extreme level of grave in nature. It is the gravest of the offenses. So this is why your IPC has actually prohibited preparation regarding these particular offenses, but not of other offenses. Let us suppose murder. The preparation of murder is not punishable. The preparation for robbery is not punishable. The preparation for theft, not punishable. Preparation for cheating, not punishable. Preparation for forgery, not punishable. Preparation for defamation, not punishable. Preparation for hurt, grievous hurt, not punishable. Why? Again, law wants to give you an opportunity. Back away from it. Back away from this course of conduct. Then this is your final opportunity, because the moment you attempt it, the law will come into action. So the moment such person doesn't back off from the stage of preparation and actually attempts the offense, now we come to the third stage, that is the attempt. Here the intention has very concretely manifested into the real world. So a person who has committed an attempt can be guilty of attempting an offense, although the facts can be such that the commission of offense be impossible. Let us suppose a person, there is a thief. He actually sees both you and me riding a metro rail, and he actually tries to pickpocket me. All right, he finds that I have actually no money in that particular pocket, but I caught hold of him and I actually take him to a police station where he is actually prosecuted for pickpocketing me and attempt to theft. 379 read with 511. So in those situations, what will happen? Can the thief take a defense that commission of this act was impossible? He never had any sort of money in his pocket, and how can theft be complete because he never even had money in his pocket? मेरी जेब में पैसा ही नहीं था तो theft कैसे complete हो सकती है? It is not theoretically possible. और उसने तो बस attempt किया, लेकिन अगर आप उसका attempt punishable करेंगे तो वो तो ऐसा attempt punish कर रहे हैं जो एक impossible act का था, क्योंकि उसकी जेब में पैसा ही नहीं था. मेरी जेब में जब पैसा ही नहीं था तो फिर कैसे हो सकता है कि कोई पर्सन थेफ्ट में सक्सीड कर सकता था जो वो करना चाह रहा था? द आंसर इज दिस कि इस सिचुएशन में वो पनिश हो जाएगा, बिकॉज उसने जो अटेम्प्ट किया है ना, ये उसका इंटेंशन मैनिफेस्ट कर रहा है. उसका गिल्टी इंटेंशन हैज मैनिफेस्टेड इनटू द रियल वर्ल्ड. ये इररिलेवेंट है कि उसमें पैसा था नहीं था, या लेट अस सपोज ही स्टील्स अ बॉक्स फ्रॉम माय होम थिंकिंग दैट इट हैज अ लॉट ऑफ मनी, उसमें कुछ भी नहीं था, और फिर वो कहता है ये तो बिल्कुल फालतू की चीज़ हो गई, यहाँ पे तो कोई पैसा ही नहीं है. बाद में वो धरे जाते हैं, फिर कहते हैं कि ये तो बहुत गलत हो गया, इसमें तो पैसा भी नहीं था, तो फिर कैसे हो सकता है कि मैंने इनका कोई पैसा चुराने में सक्सीड कर पाऊँ, क्योंकि मेरा तो इंटेंशन इनका पैसा चुराने का था. तो लॉ इस बात से कंसर्न नहीं है कि आप अपने अटेम्प्ट में सक्सीड करते हैं या नहीं. लॉ इस बात से कंसर्न है कि आपका इंटेंशन मैनिफेस्ट हुआ या नहीं. अटेम्प्ट तीन चीज़ें दिखा देता है कि गिल्टी इंटेंशन टू कमिट एन ऑफेंस, एक्ट हैज बीन डन टुवर्ड्स कमीशन ऑफ एन ऑफेंस, और एक्ट ऐसी है विच फॉल्स शॉर्ट ऑफ अ कंप्लीट ऑफेंस. एक्ट कंप्लीट नहीं हो पाती. तो अटेम्प्ट तीन चीजें हम लोग को दिखा देता है. गिल्टी इंटेंशन टू कमिट एन ऑफेंस, उसका इंटेंशन मैनिफेस्ट हो चुका है रियल वर्ल्ड में और सबको देखने के लिए, वो एवरीबडी कैन सी दैट, इट इज ए कंक्रीट थिंग एंड ऑब्जेक्टिवली यू कैन सी दैट. सेकेंड इज दैट the offender has done some act towards commission of an offense. जैसे पिक पॉकेट के एग्जाम्पल ने, उसने मेरी जेब में हाथ डालने की कोशिश की, पैसा निकालने की, तो दिस इज द एक्ट ही डिड टुवर्ड्स कमीशन ऑफ एन ऑफेंस. थर्ड स्टेज इसमें क्या होती है, जो थर्ड इसका अटेम्प्ट का एसेंशियल एलिमेंट है, वो है कि एक्ट मस्ट फॉल शॉर्ट ऑफ अ कंप्लीट ऑफेंस. अगर मेरी जेब में पैसा होता तो थेफ्ट सक्सीड हो जाती, तो उसका प्रोसिक्यूशन थेफ्ट में होता है ना, 379 में. अगर घर में चोरी करता तो 380 में आईपीसी में उसका प्रोसिक्यूशन होता. तो वो थेफ्ट कंप्लीट का प्रोसिक्यूशन है. यहाँ पे इनकम्प्लीट ऑफेंस है, अटेम्प्ट है, एंड बिकॉज द एक्ट फेल शॉर्ट ऑफ अ कंप्लीट थेफ्ट इट विल बी कॉल्ड एन अटेम्प्ट. अब आईपीसी ने कई ऐसे ऑफेंसेस हैं जो ग्रेव इन नेचर हैं, उनका अटेम्प्ट ही पनिशेबल बना दिया है स्पेसिफिकली. जहां पे नहीं स्पेसिफिकली पनिशेबल बनाया है वहां पे यू टेक द ऑफेंस इटसेल्फ एंड रीड इट विद सेक्शन 511. तो जहां पे आईपीसी ने स्पेसिफिक प्रोविजन अटेम्प्ट के लिए नहीं दिया है, देयर अगर आपको अटेम्प्ट को पनिशेबल बनाना है तो यू विल ऑलवेज टेक द मेन प्रोविजन, जो अगर ऑफेंस कंप्लीट हो जाता तो वो कौन सा प्रोविजन होता, और यू रीड इट विथ सेक्शन 511. ठीक है, तो इस चीजों का ध्यान रखिएगा. तो स्पेसिफिक ऑफेंसेस अटेम्प्ट के कहाँ हैं, तो एक कई प्रोविजन है इसके, जैसे आपके 307 है, आपका 196 है, 198 है, सेक्शन 200 है, और अटेम्प्ट्स हैं. ये सारे मैं आपको बता रहा हूँ कि जिसमें कंप्लीट ऑफेंसेस और अटेम्प्ट्स दोनों पनिशेबल हैं. 152 है, 153 है, 3A है, 385 है, 387 है, 389 है, 391 है, 394 है, 395 है, 397 है, 459 है, 463 है, 124A है, 125 है. इन सारे सेक्शंस में आपको कंप्लीट ऑफेंस और अटेम्प्ट अगर उनका किया है तो वो भी मिल जाएगा. तो इन सारी चीज़ों का ध्यान रखिएगा. और कुछ ऑफेंसेस ऐसे हैं जो सिर्फ अटेम्प्ट को पनिश करते हैं. ये जो मैंने अभी आपको ऑफेंसेस बताया है, 121, 124, 124A, 125, 130, 131, 152, 153, इसमें कंप्लीट ऑफेंसेस और उनके अटेम्प्ट्स दोनों पनिशेबल. अब आप चाहे सक्सीड करें या ना करें, ये ऑफेंसेस अगर आपने कमिट किए, बी इट अंडर दी सेक्शन जो बताया, फिर आपका 196, 198, 200 एक्सेट्रा, ये सारे आपके, या 389, 391, 394, इसमें जो आपका अटेम्प्ट है वो इटसेल्फ पनिशेबल हो जाएगा अलॉन्ग विद द कंप्लीट ऑफेंस. तो लेजिस्लेचर को उस पर्पस के लिए ज़्यादा वो नहीं लगता कि वो ज़्यादा डिफरेंस इन एक्ट्स में नहीं देख रहा. और secondly, there are some attempts to commit offences and commission of specific offences which have been dealt with separately. ये separately IPC ने डील किए, सिर्फ attempts, वो completion of offense के साथ नहीं जोड़े हैं, वो सिर्फ attempts डील विद किए हैं. जैसे कि मर्डर पनिशेबल है 302 में और अटेम्प्ट टू मर्डर पनिशेबल है 307 में. कल्पेबल होमिसाइड पनिश होती है 304 में, और अटेम्प्ट टू कमिट कल्पेबल होमिसाइड इज पनिशेबल अंडर 308. Robbery is punished under section 392 and attempt to commit robbery is punished under 393, right? और attempt to commit suicide है 309 में punishable है, but it is to be read with mental health act. ऐसे person को जो suicide attempt की कोशिश करता है उसको sentence नहीं दिया जाता, उसको in accordance with mental health act उसको rehabilitation center में भेजा जाता है काउंसलिंग के लिए, उसको डिप्रेशन से निकाला जा सके. और जहाँ पे भी आपको कोई स्पेसिफिक प्रोविजन नहीं मिलता, वहाँ क्या करेंगे अटेम्प्ट के केस में, मेन ऑफेंस लेंगे 511 से जोड़ देंगे. अब हम लोग ऐसे मान लेते हैं, मान लीजिए अगर मर्डर को लेके 307 नहीं दिया होता, लेट अस सपोज कि स्टैट्यूट बुक से 307 हटा दीजिए एग्जाम्पल के लिए, सेक्शन 307 अटेम्प्ट टू मर्डर डजंट एग्जिस्ट. तो ऐसे केस में आप क्या करते, आप 302 लेते और उसको 511 से रीड कर देते हैं, ठीक है। अब आप कोई भी ऑफेंस अगर आईपीसी में ले लीजिए, जहाँ पे आपको मिल जाता है कि लेट अस सपोज कि किडनैपिंग फॉर रैंसम का अटेम्प्ट है, ऑल राइट। तो ऐसे केस में व्हाट विल यू डू, यू विल रीड सेक्शन 364A विद 511, क्योंकि उसका स्पेसिफिक प्रोविजन नहीं है, राइट। सो यू विल रिजॉर्ट टू दोज मेथड जहां पे स्पेसिफिक प्रोविजन नहीं दिए गए हैं, और जहां पे स्पेसिफिक प्रोविजन दिए गए हैं वहां पे आप 511 को रिजॉर्ट नहीं करोगे। सो 511 इज द जनरल प्रोविजन फॉर अटेम्प्ट्स, and rest of the, if the statute has prescribed a separate provision for attempt, then that is a special provision for attempt. और ऐसे में आप what do you read, कौन सी मैक्सिम प्ले में आ जाती है, जनरली स्पेशली बस नॉन डेरोगेट, जनरल लॉ डज नॉट एक्ट इन डेरोगेशन ऑफ स्पेशल लॉ, तो वहां पे आप स्पेशल लॉ को प्रेफरेंस देंगे। ये भी पॉसिबल होता है एक ही स्टैट्यूट के अंदर कई स्पेशल लॉज हैं, स्पेशल प्रोविजन भी स्पेशल लॉ की कैटेगरी में, जरूरी नहीं है कि हमेशा स्टैट्यूट के बाहर ही स्पेशल लॉ, स्टैट्यूट के अंदर नए नए प्रोविजन भी स्पेशल लॉ हो सकते हैं। तो अगर कोई प्रोविजन स्पेसिफिक है, स्पेसिफिकली मर्डर, अटेम्प्ट टू मर्डर से डील कर रहा है, तो दैट इज अ स्पेशल लॉ, उसको प्रेफरेंस मिलेगी। आप उसको 302/511 से रीड नहीं कर सकते व्हेन द लेजिस्लेचर हैज प्रिस्क्राइब्ड सेक्शन 307। तो ये आपका अटेम्प्ट हो गया। तो हम कौन सी 3 एलिमेंट्स पे आए, इंटेंशन, प्रिपरेशन और your attempt. The last thing that we come to is accomplishment or completion. So what is completion? Again, you have succeeded in your act, actus reus हो गया, that is the completion of an offense. For example, A fires at B with an intention to kill him. If B dies, A will be guilty of committing the offense of murder, and if B is only injured, it will be a case of attempt to murder. तब वो अटेम्प्ट टू मर्डर होगा। अगर वो मर गया तो आपकी एक्ट कंप्लीट हो गई, द ऑफेंडर्स एक्ट हैज बीन कंप्लीटेड, एंड इन दोज सिचुएशंस द पर्सन, द ऑफेंडर हु हैज कमिटेड सच एन एक्ट ऑफ किलिंग बी थ्रू फायरिंग, he will be guilty of murder. But let us suppose B survives the attack. The gunshot injury is not fatal in nature. He survives the attack. In those situations, the offender shall be prosecuted for attempt to commit murder rather than murder. ये बात याद रखिएगा। So this was the theoretical aspect. इसमें से सबसे important चीजें जो आपको ध्यान में रखनी है वो ये है कि जो stages of crime है वो क्या है। Stages of crime are intention, preparation, attempt and actus reus, accomplishment और completion, ठीक है। और elements of crime क्या है, human being, mens rea, actus reus और injury, ये elements of crime है। it is one of the most popular question, ये आता है एग्जाम में, खासतौर से theoretical states में, तो ये आपको ध्यान में रखना है। apart from that, आज का lecture was purely theoretical in nature, all right, it never dealt with a practical aspect. Tomorrow what we'll do is we'll deal with the aspects of the difference between mens rea and motive. तो यहाँ पे we'll start talking about practical aspect. अब IPC का practical aspect शुरू हो जाएगा। ये theoretical aspect डील करना इसलिए ज़रूरी था क्योंकि एग्जाम के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से ये सवाल आते हैं। तो क्योंकि अगर एग्जाम के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से ये सवाल आते हैं तो इट इज़ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट फॉर मी टू डील विद देम। और अब we'll start with IPC in full force. कल से हम लोग स्टार्ट करेंगे। विल डील विद द केसेस ऑफ नथनी यादव वर्सेस स्टेट ऑफ बिहार, एटली वर्सेस स्टेट ऑफ यूपी, इंटेंशन और मोटिव में क्या डिफरेंस है, जयप्रकाश वर्सेस दिल्ली एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन में क्या हुआ, रसल्स ऑन क्राइम इसके बारे में क्या कहते हैं, ये सारा प्रैक्टिकल एस्पेक्ट्स है। बट डिसऑनेस्टली और फ्रॉडलेंटली क्या है। फिर विल मूव ऑन टू द मैक्सिमम ऑफ इग्नोरेशिया जूरिस डॉट एक्सक्यूजेट, इग्नोरेशिया जूरिस नॉन एक्सक्यूजेट, इग्नोरेशिया फैक्टी डॉस एक्सक्यूजेट। इस मैक्सिम का स्कोप क्या है, मिस्टेक ऑफ फैक्ट कब बचाती है कब नहीं बचाती, मेंस रिया कहाँ कहाँ यूज हो सकता है, टर्मिनोलॉजीज का क्या मतलब है, ये सारी चीज़ें अब हम धीरे धीरे डील करेंगे। स्ट्रिक्ट लाइबिलिटी क्या है, इट इज़ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट फॉर यू टू नो स्ट्रिक्ट लाइबिलिटी और मेंस रिया में क्या अंतर है, ये क्वेश्चन अक्सर आता है। एंड इट इज अ पॉपुलर क्वेश्चन और प्रैक्टिकल एस्पेक्ट से डील करता है। कहीं कहीं स्टैट्यूट्स में मेंस रिया इज टोटली एब्सेंट, वहां पे स्ट्रिक्ट लाइबिलिटी हो सकती है स्टैट्यूट्स पे। इसका एक एग्जांपल आपका वो हो सकता है, आपका आई थिंक व्हाट वाज द नेम ऑफ दैट एक्ट, इट वाज एसेंशियल कमोडिटीज एक्ट, उसका सेक्शन 7, वहां पे क्या कहते हैं स्ट्रिक्ट लाइबिलिटी होती है। वहाँ पे वो इंटेंशन नहीं देखा जाता, वहाँ पे देखा जाता है आप क्राइम, वहाँ पे वो चीज़ आपके यहाँ अनऑथराइज्ड कमोडिटी फूड की थी या अडल्ट्रेट कमोडिटी ऑफ फूड की थी, बस आप वहाँ पे आप सेंटेंस हो जाओगे। वहाँ पे ये नहीं देखा जाएगा आपका इंटेंशन था या आपने गलती से कर लिया, वो सारी चीज़ें इररिलेवेंट है उसके लिए। एक केस था जिसमें सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने पहले बोला था एसेंशियल कमोडिटीज एक्ट के सेक्शन 7 रेड विद सेक्शन 3 बोला था कि यहाँ पे स्ट्रिक्ट लाइबिलिटी की ज़रूरत नहीं है, लेकिन बाद में लेजिस्लेचर ने उस सेक्शन को अमेंड कर दिया था और बोला था कि नहीं स्ट्रिक्ट लाइबिलिटी की ज़रूरत है, क्योंकि वहाँ पे और अदरवाइज शब्द ऐड कर दिया था सेक्शन में, तो उसकी वजह से स्ट्रिक्ट लाइबिलिटी हो गई थी। उसके बाद सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने कह दिया था कि नहीं यहाँ पे तो लेजिस्लेचर का इंटेंशन ये है कि यहाँ पे स्ट्रिक्ट लाइबिलिटी है, स्ट्रिक्ट लाइबिलिटी है तो फिर भाई आपका फिर वहाँ पे इंटेंशन नहीं देखा जाएगा, वहाँ पे देखा जाएगा कि क्या प्रोहिबिटेड फूड आपके यहाँ था, क्या बिना लाइसेंस के आपके यहाँ फूड था, बस आप पनिश्ड, वो इंटेंशन कुछ नहीं। और ओनर हो, पर्सन हो, सर्वेंट हो, वो सारे लोग इक्वली पनिश्ड होंगे। तो स्ट्रिक्ट लाइबिलिटी का मैंडेट है। तो स्ट्रिक्ट लाइबिलिटी और मेंस रिया जो आईपीसी में आप जनरली देखते हैं उसमें क्या अंतर है, क्या ये एक्सेप्शन होता है रूल ऑफ मेंस रिया का ना, इसलिए आपको बताना ज़रूरी है। फिर कॉर्पोरेट लाइबिलिटी ऑफ अ कंपनी क्या होती है, कॉर्पस ज्यूरिस सेकंडम में क्या बोला गया है, और हेल्सबरी लॉज ऑफ इंग्लैंड में क्या बोला गया है, इंडिया हाउस ऑफ लॉर्ड्स की जजमेंट इस बात से क्या डील करते हैं, इंडियन सुप्रीम कोर्ट की जजमेंट इस बात से क्या डील करते हैं। ये टर्मिनोलॉजीज हैं जो आपको आईपीसी समझने में मदद करेंगे, जिससे आप आईपीसी होलिस्टिकली समझ सकें। फिर एक्स्ट्राडिशन भी आपको थोड़ा बताना होगा कि किस एक्ट से गवर्न होता है। एक्स्ट्राडिशन इज शॉर्ट में बता दूं, इट इज़ गवर्न विद द एक्ट ऑफ 1962, इट इज़ गवर्न बाय द एक्ट ऑफ 1962। और इस पे फिर मैं आपको केस लॉज बताऊंगा, फिर बाकी चीज़ें बताऊंगा एंड वी डील विद दैट। तो आज का लेक्चर में अगर आप इफ़ यू अंडरस्टैंड ऑलमोस्ट नथिंग अबाउट इट, लेट अस सपोज अगर आज के लेक्चर में आपको थोड़ा मन नहीं कर रहा है पढ़ने का बिल्कुल भी, देन यू कैन सिंपली डू वन थिंग and a very simple thing at that, and that is that you need to only focus on the elements of crime and the stages of crime. All right, from the point of view of everything else, it is not that relevant. Only focus on element of crime and stages of crime. यही आज के लेक्चर का मेन एसेंस है। थ्योरीज ऑफ क्राइम इसलिए बता दिया मैंने क्योंकि वो आ सकता है, बट एलिमेंट्स ऑफ क्राइम और स्टेजेस ऑफ क्राइम के क्वेश्चन को एक्सपेक्ट करिए, ये 2-3 साल में हमेशा पॉप अप करता है। अरे अक्सर शॉर्ट नोट्स में आ जाता है कि बोलेगा आपसे कि इस पर एक शॉर्ट नोट लिख दीजिए, तो कभी भी कंफ्यूज मत हो जाइएगा वरना 5 से 10 नंबर आपके एग्जाम में मिस हो जाएंगे। ऑलराइट, सो ऑलवेज नो दैट द स्टेजेस ऑफ क्राइम इज डिफरेंट एंड योर एलिमेंट्स ऑफ क्राइम इज डिफरेंट, बस ये ध्यान रखिएगा कहाँ पे क्या है। अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट थियोरेटिकल एस्पेक्ट में ये मोस्टली एसेंशियल है, और जो थ्योरीज ऑफ लॉ हैं उनको बस एक बार आपको पढ़ना होगा कि ये जानना होगा किसने क्या कहा था। अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट इट इज़ फ्रॉम माई ऑनेस्ट ओपिनियन वो ये सवाल आते हैं बट दे आर नॉट दैट पॉपुलर, वो इतने पॉपुलर नहीं हैं। आते हैं मतलब 3-4 साल में एक बार आ जाते हैं, जस्ट टू टेस्ट द एक्यूमेन ऑफ द कैंडिडेट, पूछ सकते हैं। जूरिस्प्रूडेंस में ये ज़रूर पूछा जाता है, जो लोग यूपी और उत्तराखंड का देते हैं उसमें ज़रूर ये सवाल आ जाता है। ये सारे जब सवाल आते हैं ना तो यू नीड टू बी वेरी प्रिपेयर्ड कि आप इन सब चीज़ों से डील कर सकेंगे। अगर आप नहीं कर पाएंगे तो आपके प्रीलिम्स में अगर आपके 1-2 नंबर चले गए तो हो सकता है आप मेंस के लिए सेलेक्ट ना हो। तो दैट इज़ व्हाई यू नीड टू नो ऑल ऑफ दिस। सो दैट वाज इट फॉर टुडे। टुमारो विल डील विद द न्यू एस्पेक्ट्स।